The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard as 73-year-old Harold Watkins made his way slowly toward the ceremonial grounds. His weathered hands gripped a simple wooden walking stick, each step measured and deliberate. The purple heart pinned to his worn navy blazer caught the early light, a small reminder of a war fought decades ago in jungles far from this peaceful English morning. Harold had been planning this visit for months. Today marked exactly 50 years since he had first stood on foreign soil, defending freedom alongside brothers who never made it home. The Royal Guard ceremony held special meaning for him, a connection to the military traditions that had shaped his life and the lives of so many others who had served their countries with honor. The old veteran paused near a stone bench, catching his breath. His legs weren't what they used to be, and the arthritis in his knees reminded him daily of his advancing age. But his mind remained sharp, filled with memories of young men who had believed in something greater than themselves. Those memories had brought him here today, to witness a ceremony that honored the same values they had died protecting. As Harold settled onto the bench, he noticed the growing crowd of tourists and locals gathering for the changing of the guard. Families with excited children, couples holding hands, elderly visitors like himself, all drawn to witness this timeless tradition. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation and respect, the kind of reverent energy that surrounds moments of historical significance. A young mother with her daughter approached the bench beside him. The little girl, perhaps 7 years old, wore a small Union Jack pin on her jacket and carried a notebook filled with sketches of soldiers. Her mother smiled politely at Harold, noticing his military decoration. "Excuse me, sir," the woman said softly. "My daughter Emma is studying about veterans in school. She's been drawing pictures of soldiers all week." Harold's weathered face broke into a gentle smile. "Is that so, young lady? May I see your drawings?" Emma shyly showed him her notebook, pages filled with colorful sketches of uniformed figures standing at attention. Her innocent artwork captured something pure about military service, the honor, the sacrifice, the dedication to duty that transcended politics and personal gain. "These are wonderful," Harold told her, his voice carrying the warmth of a grandfather. "You know, I was a soldier once, a long time ago." The little girl's eyes widened with fascination. "Really? Did you wear a uniform like the guards?" "Different uniform, different war," Harold explained, his fingers unconsciously touching his purple heart. "But the same promise to protect people like you and your mom." As they spoke, the crowd began to thicken around them. Harold noticed the diverse gathering, tourists speaking different languages, local families making this a weekend tradition, students with cameras capturing every moment. The universal appeal of the ceremony seemed to bring people together, regardless of their backgrounds or beliefs. 20 feet away, near the ceremonial entrance, a man in his mid-30s pushed through the crowd with obvious irritation. Marcus Thompson had been having the worst week of his life. His construction company was facing bankruptcy, his wife had filed for divorce, and his teenage son refused to speak to him. The court hearing to determine custody arrangements was scheduled for the following Monday, and Marcus felt the weight of his failures crushing down on him. Marcus had not come to the ceremony by choice. His son Tyler had begged him to attend, one of the few requests the boy had made since the family had fallen apart. Tyler was fascinated by military history and had specifically asked his father to watch the changing of the guard together. It was supposed to be a bonding experience, a chance for them to connect over something Tyler cared about. But Tyler was late, probably changing his mind about spending time with his father. Marcus checked his phone repeatedly, growing more frustrated with each passing minute. The crowd pressed around him, chattering excitedly about the upcoming ceremony, their happiness highlighting his own misery. The stress of recent months had taken its toll on Marcus. Sleep came rarely, and, when it did, nightmares about losing his son haunted his dreams. The construction business that his father had built from nothing was crumbling under the weight of bad contracts and economic pressures beyond his control. His marriage, once filled with love and laughter, had deteriorated into bitter arguments and cold silences. Marcus pulled out his phone again, scrolling through messages from his lawyer about the custody hearing. The legal language felt cold and clinical, reducing his relationship with Tyler to visitation schedules and financial obligations. He had never imagined his life would come to this, fighting for the right to spend time with his own child, defending his fitness as a father to strangers in black robes. A text message from his wife appeared on the screen. Tyler decided not to come. Don't contact him today. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His son had chosen not to see him, probably influenced by his mother's anger and disappointment. The one thing Marcus had been looking forward to, the small hope of reconnecting with Tyler, had been taken away. The crowd surged slightly as the ceremony time approached, and Marcus found himself pressed closer to the front. His frustration boiled over into anger at his wife, at his circumstances, at the world that seemed determined to take everything away from him. The cheerful atmosphere around him felt like mockery, highlighting everything he had lost. Near the bench where Harold sat with the young family, the crowd had grown considerably. The veteran watched with interest as the royal guards began their preliminary preparations. Their precision and dedication reminded him of his own military training, the countless hours spent perfecting movements that might save lives in combat situations. "Will you tell me about being a soldier?" Emma asked Harold, her notebook ready to capture his stories in her own artistic way. Harold glanced at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, it's not like the movies, sweetheart. Being a soldier means taking care of the people around you. Your fellow soldiers become your family, and you promise to protect each other no matter what happens." He paused, choosing his words carefully for such a young audience. Sometimes it's dangerous work, but it's also the most important job in the world. Soldiers protect people's freedom, the freedom to draw pictures, to go to school, to spend time with your family. Emma listened intently, adding details to her drawings as Harold spoke. Her mother watched the interaction with obvious appreciation, recognizing the value of her daughter hearing firsthand from someone who had served. "My grandfather was in the war too," Emma said suddenly. "Mum says he was very brave, but he died before I was born." Harold nodded solemnly. "I'm sure he was very brave indeed. And I bet he would be proud to see you learning about soldiers and drawing such beautiful pictures." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion nearby. Marcus had grown increasingly agitated as the crowd pressed around him. When an elderly tourist accidentally bumped into him while trying to get a better view, Marcus snapped. "Watch where you're going," he shouted, his voice carrying over the general murmur of the crowd. People turned to look, the peaceful atmosphere suddenly tense. The elderly tourist, a woman in her 80s, stumbled slightly and looked frightened by Marcus's aggressive response. Her husband, frail but protective, stepped between them. "There's no need for that tone, young man," the old gentleman said quietly. "It was an accident." Marcus's anger flared higher. The old man's calm dignity only emphasized Marcus's own loss of control, his failure to handle the pressures in his life with grace. "Maybe you people should stay home if you can't handle crowds," he retorted, his voice getting louder. Harold, sitting nearby, watched the scene unfold with growing concern. He had seen this kind of displaced anger before, usually in young veterans struggling to adjust to civilian life. But this man seemed different, not traumatized by war, but broken by the ordinary cruelties of modern life. The crowd around Marcus began to give him space, sensing the volatility in his manner. Parents pulled their children closer, and the festive atmosphere dampened noticeably. The royal guards, maintaining their professional composure, continued their preparations despite the disturbance. Emma looked up at Harold with worried eyes. "Why is that man so angry?" Harold considered his answer carefully. "Sometimes people carry heavy burdens, sweetheart. When life becomes too difficult, some folks forget how to be kind to others." Marcus overheard the comment and turned toward Harold with fury in his eyes. The sight of the elderly veteran, decorated and dignified despite his age, seemed to trigger something deeper in Marcus's psyche. Here was everything he felt he should be but wasn't: honorable, respected, at peace with himself. "What did you say, old man?" Marcus demanded, pushing through the crowd toward Harold's bench. Harold remained seated, his hands steady on his walking stick. Years of military training had taught him to recognize genuine threats, and he sensed something dangerous building in this stranger's demeanor. But Harold also recognized pain when he saw it, the kind of deep, soul-crushing pain that could drive good people to do terrible things. "I said that life can be difficult for all of us," Harold replied calmly. Perhaps we could all use a bit more patience with one another. Emma's mother instinctively pulled her daughter closer, sensing the tension escalating beyond a simple misunderstanding. Other spectators began to back away, creating a wider circle around the confrontation. The joyful anticipation of the ceremony was being replaced by anxiety and fear. Marcus stood over Harold now, his fists clenched at his sides. The veteran represented everything Marcus felt he had failed to become: a man who had served something greater than himself, who wore his achievements with quiet dignity, who commanded respect through character rather than force. Easy words from someone who probably never had real problems, Marcus said bitterly. Sitting here with your little medal, playing the hero for children. Harold's expression never changed, but those who knew him well would have recognized the subtle shift in his posture, the way his shoulders squared slightly, his grip on the walking stick adjusted for balance rather than support. Decades of training never truly left a soldier, regardless of age. I've had my share of difficulties, son, Harold said quietly. We all have. The question is how we choose to handle them. The word son seemed to hit Marcus like a slap. His own father had died disappointed in him, watching the construction business struggle under Marcus's management. His own son was choosing to avoid him, probably ashamed of what his father had become. The gentle authority in Harold's voice reminded Marcus of everything he had lost and everyone he had failed. Don't call me son, Marcus growled, stepping closer to the seated veteran. You don't know anything about my problems. Harold slowly began to stand, his movements deliberate and controlled. At his full height, the elderly veteran still commanded presence, though age had bent his frame and slowed his reflexes. Emma watched in frightened fascination as the kind grandfather figure who had been showing such interest in her drawings transformed into something else entirely. You're right, Harold acknowledged, standing now with his walking stick held loosely at his side. I don't know your problems. But I know this isn't the way to solve them. The crowd had formed a loose circle around them now, everyone sensing that something significant was about to happen. Some people had their phones out, recording what they hoped would remain just a verbal altercation. Others looked around nervously for security personnel or police officers who might intervene. Marcus felt the eyes of dozens of strangers watching his humiliation unfold. His life was falling apart in private, and now he was making a spectacle of himself in public. The knowledge that his behavior was being recorded, that his son might someday see video of this moment, only fueled his rage further. This is your fault, Marcus said irrationally, his logic twisted by stress and anger. People like you, with your wars and your medals, making the rest of us feel like failures. Harold shook his head sadly. I never asked anyone to feel like a failure, son. Service isn't about making others feel small. It's about making something good bigger than yourself. The word son again, delivered with such natural authority and compassion that it broke something inside Marcus. All the pressure of recent months, the failing business, the divorce, the custody battle, his son's rejection, culminated in this moment of absolute loss of control. Marcus drew back his right arm, his hand forming a fist aimed at the elderly veteran's face. The crowd gasped collectively, some people screaming warnings, others stepping forward to intervene. Emma buried her face against her mother's coat, frightened by the violence she didn't understand. Time seemed to slow as Marcus's fist moved toward its target. Harold, despite his age, saw the punch coming with the clarity of someone who had been in combat situations where split-second reactions meant the difference between life and death. His mind processed multiple responses: step back, deflect with his walking stick, call for help. But Harold also saw something else in that frozen moment, the desperate pain in Marcus's eyes, the self-destructive nature of what was happening. This wasn't evil striking out at goodness. This was a broken man destroying himself in the most public way possible, and taking an innocent elderly veteran down with him. The first part of this story ends here, with a fist traveling through the air toward an elderly veteran who had come to honor fallen comrades, while a crowd of strangers watched in horror and a little girl clutched her drawings of brave soldiers. What happens next would change multiple lives forever, setting in motion consequences that none of them could foresee. 3 things happened simultaneously in that split second that would forever alter the trajectory of multiple lives. Harold, moving with reflexes honed by decades of military training, stepped slightly to his left while raising his walking stick in a defensive position. A young royal guard named James Mitchell, who had been monitoring the crowd as part of his ceremonial duties, broke protocol and rushed forward with surprising speed. And Marcus himself, seeing Harold's defensive movement and the guard's approach, realized the magnitude of what he was about to do. But it was too late to stop the momentum of his swing. Marcus's fist connected not with Harold's face, but with the elderly veteran's shoulder, sending the old man stumbling backward. Harold's walking stick clattered to the cobblestones as he fought to maintain his balance, his weathered hands grasping for anything to steady himself. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps and angry shouts. Emma's mother pulled her daughter behind the bench, shielding the child from the violence. Several bystanders rushed forward to help Harold, while others backed away in fear that the situation might escalate further. James Mitchell reached Marcus first, his training taking over despite the breach of ceremonial protocol. "Sir, step back immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Marcus stood frozen, his hands still raised, staring at Harold as the reality of what he had done crashed over him like a cold wave. The elderly veteran was struggling to stay upright, supported by two tourists who had rushed to his aid. The Purple Heart that had caught the morning sunlight now seemed to mock Marcus's actions, a reminder of the man's service and sacrifice. "Oh God," Marcus whispered, his anger instantly transforming into horror. "I didn't mean. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." But apologies could not undo what had happened. Within moments, the scene was swarming with additional royal guards who had abandoned their ceremonial positions to respond to the emergency. Their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats created a dramatic contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. Harold, still breathing heavily from the shock and exertion, waved off the concerned helpers. "I'm all right," he insisted, though his voice was shaky. "Just need to catch my breath." A paramedic who had been stationed nearby for the ceremony pushed through the crowd, carrying a medical kit. "Let me check you over, sir," she said professionally, guiding Harold back to the bench. "You've had quite a shock." Emma, peering around her mother's protective embrace, watched as the kind man who had admired her drawings was examined for injuries. "Mummy, why did that man hurt the soldier?" she asked, her voice small and confused. Her mother struggled to find words that could explain such senseless violence to a child. "I don't know, sweetheart. Some people make very bad choices when they're upset." Meanwhile, Marcus found himself surrounded by royal guards and several plainclothes security personnel who had materialized from the crowd. His brief moment of regret was quickly overwhelmed by panic as he realized the legal consequences of what he had done. Assaulting an elderly veteran in front of dozens of witnesses, many of whom had recorded the incident on their phones, would not be easily explained away. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of the security officers said firmly, producing handcuffs. "You're under arrest for assault." "Wait, please," Marcus pleaded, his earlier anger completely evaporated. "Let me apologize to him. I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm going through a divorce, and my son." "Save it for your lawyer," the officer replied curtly, beginning to recite Marcus's rights as he secured the handcuffs. Harold looked up from his medical examination, his face pale but his voice steady. "Officer, if I might have a word with the young man before you take him away." The security personnel exchanged glances, clearly reluctant to allow further interaction between victim and perpetrator. But Harold's obvious military bearing and the respect commanded by his age and service record carried weight even in this chaotic moment. "Just a moment, sir," the lead officer agreed, though he kept Marcus firmly in custody. "But make it brief." Harold stood slowly, still supported by the paramedic who had pronounced him bruised but not seriously injured. He looked directly at Marcus for the first time since the assault, his weathered face showing no anger, only a deep sadness that seemed to encompass more than just this single incident. "Son," Harold began, and Marcus flinched at the word that had helped trigger his violent outburst. "I need you to understand something. What happened here today, it's not going to solve whatever problems you're facing. If anything, you've just made them much worse." Marcus nodded miserably, tears starting to form in his eyes. I know I've ruined everything. My son, if he sees the video of this." "Your son?" Harold's expression shifted slightly, showing a flash of the grandfatherly warmth he had displayed with Emma. "You have a child?" "Tyler. He's 16. Marcus's voice broke as he spoke. "He wanted to come here today, to see the ceremony. We're going through a custody battle, and I thought maybe we could have one good day together. But he didn't show up, and I just lost control." Harold was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face with the kind of attention that comes from decades of reading people under stress. The veteran had seen young soldiers crack under pressure, had watched good men make terrible decisions when pushed beyond their limits. While Harold could never excuse what Marcus had done, he recognized the signs of a man whose life had spiraled beyond his ability to control. "Listen to me carefully," Harold said finally, his voice low enough that only Marcus and the nearby officers could hear. "You're going to face consequences for what you did here. That's as it should be. But how you handle those consequences will determine what kind of father you are to your son." Emma, still watching from behind her mother, had picked up her notebook and was sketching again. But this time, instead of proud soldiers at attention, she was drawing the sad scene unfolding before her: an old man trying to help someone who had hurt him, surrounded by other soldiers trying to protect them both. The crowd around them had grown even larger as word spread through the ceremonial grounds. Many people had their phones out, recording everything. Marcus realized with growing horror that his lowest moment was being broadcast live to potentially thousands of viewers on social media platforms. His son would definitely see this. His wife would have additional ammunition for the custody battle. His employees would lose what little respect they still had for him. "I've destroyed everything," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to Harold. "No," Harold replied firmly. "You've damaged things, badly. But destroyed? That depends entirely on what you do from this point forward." The security officer in charge was growing impatient. "Sir, we really need to get him processed and transported. This has already taken longer than it should." Harold nodded but continued speaking to Marcus as the officers prepared to lead him away. "When you get out of this mess, and you will get out of it eventually, find me. I'll be here for the ceremony again next month. We'll talk about what it means to rebuild your life when you think everything is lost." Marcus stared at Harold in amazement. You'd want to see me again? After what I did?" "Son, I've seen good men do terrible things when they're pushed too far. I've also seen terrible men do good things when they're given the chance. I'm not sure which category you fall into yet, but I'm willing to find out." The officers began escorting Marcus away, but he turned back one more time. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I own Thompson Construction, or used to. If you're serious about talking again." "I'm serious," Harold confirmed. "Harold Watkins. Ask for me at the Veterans Association if you need to find me." As Marcus was led through the crowd toward a waiting police vehicle, the whispers and commentary from the onlookers followed him like a wave. Some people expressed satisfaction at seeing justice done quickly. Others seemed disappointed that the dramatic confrontation had ended so anticlimactically. A few individuals, perhaps recognizing their own struggles with anger and frustration in Marcus's breakdown, watched with more sympathy than judgment. Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mummy, why did the soldier say he would talk to the bad man again?" Her mother considered the question carefully. I think he believes people can change. That even when someone does something very wrong, they might be able to learn from it and become better. Like when I broke your favorite cup and felt really sorry? Something like that, darling. But this was much more serious than breaking a cup." Emma nodded solemnly and returned to her drawing, adding details to the scene she had witnessed. In her innocent artistic interpretation, she drew Harold not as a victim, but as a teacher helping someone who was lost and angry. The paramedic finished her examination of Harold and pronounced him fit to remain for the ceremony if he wished. The elderly veteran straightened his blazer, checked that his Purple Heart was still properly pinned, and retrieved his walking stick from where it had fallen. "Will you be staying for the changing of the guard, sir?" James Mitchell asked. The young guardsman had remained nearby after helping to secure Marcus, clearly concerned about Harold's well-being. Harold looked around at the crowd, many of whom were still staring at him with mixtures of curiosity, sympathy, and respect. The incident had disrupted the ceremonial atmosphere, but people seemed reluctant to leave without seeing the traditional pageantry they had come to witness. "I think I will," Harold decided. "I came here to honor some friends who didn't make it home from war. A little altercation with a troubled young man isn't going to keep me from that purpose." James Mitchell smiled with obvious admiration. "Sir, it would be an honor if you would watch the ceremony from the VIP area. Given what just happened, and your service record, I think the commanding officer would want to extend that courtesy." Harold shook his head gently. "Thank you, son, but I'll watch from right here with these good people. That young lady has been showing me her drawings of soldiers, and I promised to explain the ceremony to her." Emma looked up eagerly, her earlier fear forgotten in the excitement of having a real veteran as her personal guide to the military tradition she was about to witness. Her mother smiled gratefully, recognizing Harold's gentle wisdom in helping her daughter process what had been a frightening experience. As the crowd settled back into anticipation for the ceremony, conversations buzzed with analysis of what they had just witnessed. Social media posts were already spreading across various platforms, with hashtags like #VeteranAssault and #RoyalGuardIntervention trending rapidly. In one post that would be shared thousands of times, a teenager who had recorded part of the incident wrote, "Old army vet gets attacked by angry guy, then offers to help him change his life. This is what real courage looks like." Another viral post came from a professional photographer who had captured the moment when Harold offered to speak with Marcus again, the definition of grace under pressure. This man just turned an assault into a teaching moment. But, for every supportive post, there were others demanding harsher punishment for Marcus, criticizing Harold for being too lenient, or questioning whether the incident was staged for social media attention. The modern reality of instant global communication meant that a moment of human crisis and redemption was immediately transformed into content for public consumption and debate. Harold, unaware of his sudden internet fame, focused his attention on Emma's questions about the approaching ceremony. "Now then, young lady, do you see how the guards are standing? That's called attention position. It means they're ready to receive orders." Emma watched intently as the traditional ceremony began to unfold. The precise movements, the coordinated timing, the respect for tradition and duty, it all seemed especially meaningful after witnessing the breakdown of order and dignity in the assault just minutes earlier. "Mr. Harold," Emma said quietly, "are you sad that man hurt you?" Harold considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm sad that he's in so much pain that he thought hurting someone else would help. But I'm not sad about what happened to me. Sometimes good things come from bad situations, if we're willing to look for them. What good thing came from this?" Harold smiled, watching the royal guards execute their ceremonial drill with flawless precision. "Well, I met you and got to see your beautiful drawings. And, maybe, if that young man is willing to do the hard work, he might find a way to rebuild his relationship with his son." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense, then returned her attention to the ceremony. In her notebook, she began a new drawing, not of the assault or the arrest, but of Harold standing tall and dignified, talking calmly to Marcus while the royal guards maintained their protective circle around both men. The ceremony proceeded with its traditional pageantry, but, for many in attendance, the real lesson had already been delivered by an elderly veteran who had chosen grace over anger, wisdom over vengeance, and hope over despair. The ripple effects of that choice were already spreading far beyond the ceremonial grounds, though none of them could imagine just how far those ripples would travel. 3 days after the incident, Marcus sat in a cold holding cell, staring at concrete walls that seemed to close in a little more each hour. The initial shock of his arrest had given way to a deeper, more crushing realization of the consequences his moment of rage would bring. His lawyer, a tired-looking man named David Pemberton, had painted a grim picture during their first consultation. Assault on an elderly person, captured on multiple video recordings, with dozens of witnesses, Pemberton had explained bluntly. "The Crown Prosecution Service isn't going to offer any sweetheart deals on this one, Marcus. Especially with your victim being a decorated veteran. Marcus had spent those 3 days replaying the incident over and over in his mind, analyzing every decision that had led to that moment of complete loss of control. The failing business, the divorce proceedings, Tyler's rejection, none of it justified what he had done to Harold Watkins. If anything, his actions had made every problem worse. The custody hearing had been postponed indefinitely. His wife Sarah had obtained an emergency restraining order, citing the assault as evidence of his violent tendencies. Thompson Construction had lost 2 major contracts when clients saw the viral videos online. His employees were looking for other jobs, knowing the company wouldn't survive the scandal. But the worst part was Tyler. His 16-year-old son had seen the videos, along with everyone at his school. Marcus could only imagine the humiliation and shame Tyler must be feeling, having to explain to his friends why his father had attacked an elderly war veteran for no apparent reason. On the morning of the 4th day, Marcus was informed he had a visitor. He expected to see Pemberton again, or perhaps one of the construction foremen coming to deliver more bad news about the business. Instead, he found himself face to face with Harold Watkins. The elderly veteran looked exactly as Marcus remembered him, dignified, calm, wearing the same navy blazer with the purple heart. Harold's left shoulder showed some bruising where Marcus's punch had landed, a visible reminder of what had happened at the ceremony. "Mr. Watkins," Marcus began, standing awkwardly in the visitor's room. I can't believe you came here." "I promised I would talk to you again," Harold replied simply, taking a seat at the small metal table. "I keep my promises." Marcus sat down across from him, struggling to find words. "I need you to know how sorry I am. What I did was inexcusable. You were just being kind to that little girl, and I—" "Son," Harold interrupted gently, "I didn't come here to listen to apologies. I came here because I think you need to understand something about second chances." Over the next hour, Harold told Marcus stories that the younger man would never forget. He spoke about David Chen, a young soldier who had been under Harold's command in Vietnam. Chen had made a critical error during a patrol that cost the lives of 3 fellow soldiers. The mistake haunted Chen so completely that he became reckless, almost suicidal in his guilt. David was convinced his life was over, Harold explained. He thought the families of those dead soldiers would never forgive him, that his own family would disown him when they learned what happened. He was ready to give up completely. "What happened to him?" "I made him write letters to the families of the men who died. Not apology letters, letters telling them who their sons were as soldiers, what they meant to their unit, how they had lived and fought and died with honor. It took David 6 months to write those letters, and they saved his life." Harold paused, studying Marcus's face. "You see, David learned that healing doesn't come from wallowing in guilt. It comes from finding ways to honor the people you've wronged by becoming better than you were." Marcus felt tears starting to form. "But what I did to you, how can I possibly make up for that?" "You can't," Harold said bluntly. "You can never undo what happened. But you can decide what it means going forward." Harold reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came to me yesterday. I thought you might want to see it." Marcus unfolded the paper to find a child's drawing. It was Emma's artwork, showing Harold and Marcus talking while royal guards stood nearby. At the top, in careful child's handwriting, were the words, "The soldier who helps people learn." "She gave this to her mother to mail to me," Harold explained. "Along with a note asking if the angry man would be okay, and if someone would teach him how to be kind like the soldiers." Marcus stared at the drawing, overwhelmed by the innocent perspective that saw potential for redemption even in his darkest moment. "She thinks I can learn to be better?" "Children often see possibilities that adults miss," Harold replied. "The question is whether you're willing to do the work required." Harold then told Marcus about his own struggles after returning from war. The nightmares, the anger, the difficulty adjusting to civilian life where people complained about trivial problems while his friends lay buried in foreign soil. He spoke about the time he had nearly struck his own father during an argument about his drinking. "I was lucky," Harold said. "My father was a patient man who understood that healing takes time. He helped me find purpose again by involving me in veteran support programs. Gave me a way to honor my fallen friends by helping other soldiers who were struggling. But, I'm not a soldier, Marcus said quietly. I'm just someone who's made a mess of everything. Son, battles aren't only fought in wars. You're fighting for your relationship with your son, for your business, for your own soul. The question is whether you're going to fight with honor or keep destroying everything you touch. Harold leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of a commanding officer giving crucial orders. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to plead guilty to the charges against you. No excuses, no justifications. You're going to accept whatever sentence the court gives you. And, while you're serving that sentence, you're going to figure out how to rebuild yourself into the kind of man your son can be proud of. Marcus nodded, feeling something shift inside him, a tiny spark of hope where there had been only despair. How do I even begin? Start with the truth, Harold advised. Write to your son. Not to apologize for what you did, he already knows you're sorry. Write to tell him who you want to become, what you've learned, how you plan to honor the second chance you don't deserve but might still receive. Harold stood to leave, but Marcus called out to him. Mr. Watkins, why are you helping me? After what I did to you, why give me hope? The elderly veteran paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame. Because 53 years ago, a scared kid named Harold Watkins came home from a war he barely survived. I was angry, broken, convinced my life was over. But people invested in my healing anyway. A debt like that, you never really pay it back. You just pass it forward. After Harold left, Marcus sat alone in the visitor's room for a long time, staring at Emma's drawing. The guards eventually came to escort him back to his cell, but something fundamental had changed. The crushing weight of despair had been replaced by something equally heavy but somehow bearable, the responsibility of earning redemption. That night, Marcus began writing the first of many letters to Tyler. Not apologies, as Harold had advised, but honest reflections on what it meant to be a man, a father, a human being capable of both terrible mistakes and meaningful growth. Meanwhile, Harold returned home to his small flat, where the walls were covered with photographs and letters from decades of soldiers he had mentored through difficult transitions. He added Emma's drawing to the collection, a reminder.